This is Michael Beal from Tallgrass AI, and today we're going to go and continue this series called Tactical Analysis and step into a tactical insight collaboration tool called Business IQ. As with any new tool, we want to go ahead and take it one step at a time and introduce basically the framework, the modules of the application, and how they interact. So with that, introducing Business IQ. In another video series, I actually step through the four major parts to the toolbar here, starting with views, filtering, analytics, and the various tools. The menus are deep. The advanced functionality is extraordinary. And so before we really can get into any of that extraordinary functionality, we need to really just start simple. Okay, so that's precisely what we've done here. So let's basically just start with the viewer here. This is our landing page per se, where we can host these little data blocks, and this data block we call a dimension. Okay, so let's kind of pull apart what a dimension is. First, this is what we would call a time dimension. Okay, there's four major kinds of dimensions, but today we're just going to focus on just one called the time dimension. Okay, and as you can see, it's called time. We have some values here. Okay, and then we actually have a roll up here, or I'm sorry, some measures here. Okay, and just like in Excel, it's pretty easy to associate the year 2015 with a count of 473,000. Okay, and the cool thing about dimensions is they can have structure, and later on we'll start talking about just how powerful this tool is in dynamically creating taxonomies, right, groupings, doing something called phrase mapping, so we can actually, search through free form fields and create very meaningful clusters in real time. Okay, and understand that the tool here is highly scalable, but to our point today is it's a collaboration tool at the same time. So as we kind of step through and we learn different pieces, we'll kind of touch on the skill sets and understand that there is a common skill set amongst all users that allow us to create these models, which really solves that Excel personal sausage making capability that we all seem to find ourselves in. Okay, so let's pull apart what a dimension is. Okay, first we have a label, and then we're going to have a roll-up of a particular measure. So here we're actually rolling up the amount column that I've actually hidden for the moment. So I tell you what, why don't we go ahead and actually show that. So I'm actually going to come up here into Preferences. Here we go, and I'm going to choose to show the amount measure. Okay, and here we have the amount measure. Okay, so if we were going to roll this up, what we would find is it would equal the 1.7 billion dollars of spend here. Okay, so what this cube actually is this is a purchasing cube. All right, so we have to be first familiar with what count is. So count is basically an event. Okay, at least in the more traditional sense of like a time series cube, to where we're actually looking at an event that occurred on a particular time, at a particular time. Another word for that in this space is called a fact. So it was a factual event that occurred. So we could even say that this is the file that created this cube, right? And again, more terms coming at you. We could actually call that a fact file. So the word name cube is very similar to, let's say, a Microsoft Excel pivot table, to where when you drill on a particular element, it pivots all other elements. Okay, so that here that exact behavior is shared. Okay, but as you can see, we're only looking at one of the dimensions inside of the cube. Okay, and dimensions have structure. Okay, so here we actually have a time structure. Okay, and we can keep opening this up all the way down to a monthly level. Okay, and inside of Business IQ, we can multi-filter. Okay, so I'm going to open up and I want to let's say look at January to January, all right, across these 3 years. Okay, and by doing that, the yellow filter is highlighted, and when I click on this particular, we've just now filtered down to 120 million of the $1.7 billion, and we can see that this dimension is in sync with this. So as we start introducing different kinds of more dimensions, understand that just very similar to a pivot table, every dimension stays in balance. In other words, there is an intersection, right, between every dimension and every other dimension, and that also includes the measures themselves. So now that we've kind of looked at multi-filtering, let's go ahead and let's kind of step through the various different functions here. So here we have something called a quick chart. We can drop this down and we're greeted with a menu of all the various different kinds of charts that we can quickly create. Okay, I think I want to create a column chart, and let's do this by amount. Okay, and by doing that, we're immediately gratified with a chart that represents the spend that you see in these 3 yellow bars. Because there is a syncing capability of the application, right? When we unfilter, right, what's going to happen is kind of like what you see is what you get, right, is going to occur. And the chart and the time dimension will stay in sync with one another. Okay, and notice I said what you see is what you get. Notice the ragged structure that's here inside of the dimension is also here inside of the chart. So that's not always optimal. So why don't we go ahead and make this a nice flat versus a ragged structure, and we'll just resync the chart. And there we have it. The chart itself is actually drillable. So if we wanted to just focus, let's say, on Q3 of 2016, we could do that. And again, the entire system pivots. Okay, if we want a little more granularity, resync, and so forth. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's unfilter now this dimension. Okay, there is a rich menu, right, if I right click at this particular time. Okay, and we'll touch on some of these. Some of the others are I would consider advanced functions, right? But we can go through probably let's go through the top 4 at least, and let's go into, let's say, expand all. Okay, and when we expand all, what we've done is we've actually expanded all of the children underneath their parents. Okay, let's click on the next one, expand all to level. Okay, let's expand all to, let's say, level 2. So year would be level 1, quarter would be level 2. Okay, so if our intention was to create a level 2, a quarter based view, we would have this. And as always, we can come back to the chart and resync. Awesome. Okay, let's right click again and let's collapse all. So what's going to happen is, irregardless, it's going to collapse everything inside of this particular dimension. There we go. So it will roll up to the highest level parent. Next, adjust block size. Okay, so notice we have 3 elements showing. Okay, so let's kind of touch on a couple key features and introduce some new context, some new language. So this is the time dimension. Inside of the dimension, we have dimensional elements. So 2014 is a dimensional element. I can open that up. We can see the 4 children elements inside of 2014, Q1 through 4. We can open that up. And again, here we are, we see the 3 months inside of Q1 2014. Okay, so a node, right? So each one of these would be considered a node and an element. Okay, sometimes you'll hear terms like leaf node. Leaf node means the most granular child inside of any structure. Okay, so the leaf node inside of this structure would be, well, month. Okay. Next, let's go ahead and let's say that, well, as with every tool and environment, there is limitations, right, on how many of those dimensional nodes you can actually put inside of a dimension. And there's defaults in place to make sure that we don't overwhelm the system, or that we can at least optimize our views. So you'll hear me saying this a lot about Business IQ. Business IQ is an in-memory tool, so you pay with memory. Okay, it's an incredibly scalable system, but at some point you reach the law of diminished return, right? How much memory do you need, right, to get to that 90% use case, right? Because at that point you've reached a limit to where, yes, you could scale the system more, right? But the resources, right, cost money. Resources aren't free, right? Even though it's a very capable tool, and how they leverage the resources, they're still resources. So we still need to be cognizant. We still need to optimize things like the dimensional node count. Okay, so the higher the node count, the more of these leaf nodes that we actually have to achieve, right, to put inside of our cubes, the more memory that we're going to require. Okay, and there is a cost factor, right, that the more memory we require, obviously the more costly the questions will be. Okay, so there is a diminished return that eventually would be met. So when we look at this adjust block size, one of the controls is it only allows by default us to look at about 500 of these nodes at one time. Okay, and that's actually quite a lot, but let's just say that we needed more, because some of the other tools up here are also what you see is what you get. So if you happen to have, let's say, a dimension with 1,000 nodes, such as maybe, I don't know, 1,000 serial numbers per se, and only 500 of them are showing, and you wanted to create a report up here with one of the tools that is truly a what you see is what you get tool, it's going to truncate. It's going to truncate, right? So not to go into too much user in-depth functionality, just understand that it's controllable. Okay, so we can temporarily overwrite some of the safety features, right? And when we do so, we're greeted with warnings, right? And how many dimensional elements can acceptably be put in here. Okay, so here, enter the temporary size of this data block and number of lines, currently 500. Note, extending the size limits item will impact viewer speed, hence memory. Okay, so we'll put 1,000. Click OK. Are you sure? Extending this limit may seriously impact viewer speed. Okay, so there isn't 1,000 elements to be had in this dimension, but when we right-clicked, adjust block size, that is the intent. Okay, so we've covered dimensions, we've covered the right-click menu. I think the other part that's really intriguing, something that we should really look at, is we're going to kind of step over and come down here to view transactions. So the cool thing about tactical analysis and this particular tool is the ability to get all the way down into granularity. So let's go ahead now and let's drill on, let's say, January. Okay, and when we do that, we see we have rolled up $22 million of savings over 20,000, let's say, invoices. Okay, next we're going to actually bring in another dimension. Okay, and this is a vendor. This is basically a range. Okay, we'll talk more about ranges, but I want to go ahead and let's drill on all of the vendors that are between $0 and $10,000 in spend. Okay, next we're actually going to pop out even another dimension. Okay, and this is going to be called this is our general ledger. Okay, so here we have a chart, we have our time dimension, we have our vendor band, so we can actually kind of get an idea of what band of spend is being performed. And then now here we have our general ledger and all of the various different accounts, right, that we purchase against. And I'm going to drill on this one called travel. Okay, so now we can immediately tell that I'm looking at $51,000 of spend across 614 invoices, and up here we have our denominator of 1.7 billion, and so we're grounded. We kind of know where we're at. So now it's time to again come down. We're going to right click, And I'm going to display transactions using Excel. We could also use a browser if we wanted to. Okay, and we're going to just extract the raw transactions directly into Excel. So you'll hear me talk about Excel, what it is, what it isn't. One thing it certainly is a wonderful place to actually extract information from. It's a wonderful place to where users can create complex reports with all that amazing functionality, beautify them, and then leverage them as templates. So Excel is an amazing templating technology. And here we can see it's also a great place for us to simply just dump those darn transactions so we can actually get a good low view of these 614 invoices. And here they are. Okay, so it's very possible for us to keep a high level view, right, cohesive, and collaborate with multiple users simultaneously, which is something we'll touch on later. But then immediately just cut to the chase and get down to raw low transactions. Okay, let's right click again, and we can also dump the dimensions themselves. So here let's actually dump all of the dimensions. Okay, so when we do that, it's actually going to take a snapshot of the viewer as it is currently, and it's going to create, here we go, it's going to create a nice view for us, right, of all the top elements. In other words, what you see is what you get. Right, so here's our general ledger. What we've drilled on travel, our commodity is related as overhead, and here's our vendors. And we're looking at 100 of 453 of 453. So we're actually underneath 500. So we're actually able to see all of them. And here are all of our vendors. And next to that is the amount and the count. Okay. So let's go ahead and leave the right-click menu now, and let's move on into these last four icons. So here, switch panes. Let's open that up. So here, so far you've seen me just kind of floating the dimensions around. Okay, well we can also lock them in place in two panes, in the left pane and the right pane. There's other functionality available that allows us even more functionality, right, and how we want to basically paint our multiple monitors with multiple dimensions. But for now, we're just going to keep it simple, and I'm going to lock all of these dimensions into panes. Okay, and again, every element, such as a chart, can also be locked into a pane. So let's lock this into the left pane, and we'll lock these two here into the right pane. Okay, good. Okay, now that we've done that, let's go ahead. If we want, we can actually minimize a dimension, like so. And if we want to actually hide a dimension, okay, they're not going to disappear, right? So here we can see that I still have a commodity dimension hidden, I have organization hidden, and I have a transaction size hidden. And these are the four dimensions that you see active in the viewer. So let's go ahead and hide everything but time again. So we'll hide this, and we'll hide this. Good. Okay, so now that we've hidden those dimensions, if we wanted to, we can come back here, and we can actually unhide this dimension. So we can actually pop the commodity dimension back out and hide them back again. Okay, and then finally, if we want to simply hide a dimension you just saw me doing a moment ago, we can actually just click here, and now we're only left with a chart. Okay, here now we can actually unfilter the world, and we're left with an interactive chart only, which is fully acceptable if that's how you want to design your particular view. Okay, so that's a good first start, I think, on what is a dimension. Next, we'll dive on into the various different kinds of dimensions, right? And then we'll also touch on the measures. Okay, so measures and dimensions and how they interact with one another are extremely important and extraordinarily powerful, especially when we start to understand that there is a recursive process that we've kind of discovered and trained over the decades using this tool, to where we can take a measure and capture it, let's say, with inside of a distributed range. And then we can also turn around and take a filter and turn that into a dedicated measure based off of, let's say, a filter position, like, I don't know, let's say like 2015 quarter four. So there is so much to dive into, but I think this is a great start. Thank you for hanging in there this whole time, and I look forward to diving into more. Thank you.